She was 19 years old and left for dead. No horse. No map. No name on any piece of paper that still counted. Just a dented tin canteen. A folded letter from a grandfather 4 years buried. And 5 miles of dry grass between her and a shack the drovers called Juniper Wells. Her name was Adaline Merriman. Her father had been in the ground since February. And on a Tuesday morning in the summer of 1883, her stepmother sat at the head of the kitchen table in a good gray dress and read aloud a paper that had already been signed the day before in town. The paper said Adaline was to be conveyed to the eastern grazing. It said she would be provided a blanket, a sack of cornmeal, a 1/4 pound of salt, and the canteen she already owned. It did not say she was expected to come back. Her stepbrother drove the wagon. He did not speak. When he set her down in the middle of that flat, 5 miles from the shack her stepmother had chosen for her, he did not turn his head to watch her walk. But what none of them guessed, not the stepmother in the good gray dress, not the brothers who had erased her name from the ledger, was that under the worn plank floor of that shack lay something a woman had put there before Adaline was born. Settle in, pour yourself something warm, and tell us in the comments where in the country you are listening from tonight. Because this is a story that deserves to be told slowly. The stove was cold when she came down, for in the morning, same as every morning, except this one, she did not know that yet. She knew only that the kindling was low, the water pail was empty, and her stepmother did not tolerate a cold kitchen at breakfast. So she moved quiet, boots in her hand, until she was past the stairs. Because Silas slept, with his door cracked open now. And Silas was a light sleeper. And Silas had begun to look at her the last few months in a way she did not care to name. She set the fire, watched the pine catch, fed it slow, and she thought of her grandfather. Gideon Fairchild had been dead 4 summers that July. But he still spoke to her in the small hours, when there was work to do, and no one to see her do it. Draw water first, he would say. Everything else waits on water. She could hear him plain, as if he were standing beside her in his old cavalry coat, with the sleeves cut down, and the collar gone soft at the throat. She drew water, 2 buckets from the pump in the yard. She did not shiver in the cold. She had learned young not to shiver. Cold was weather. Weather was not personal. Weather did not care what a 19-year-old girl thought of it. And what did not care could not hurt you. That was an old lesson. One of the first. By 5 the coffee was on. By 6 the biscuits were in. By 6:30 the bacon was in the pan, and the eggs were cracked in the tin bowl, and the table was laid for 4. Her plate did not go on the table. She had eaten standing at the stove for 7 years. It was not a punishment. It was a fact. Facts did not need arguing with. She was scrubbing the skillet when Vera came down. Her stepmother wore the gray wool, the good one, the one that stayed folded in tissue paper in the chest at the foot of her bed, and only came out for church and for town, and for the day the cattle buyer came from Cheyenne. It was not Sunday. There was no buyer expected. Adaline set the skillet down slow. "Coffee," Vera said. "Yes, ma'am." "Sit down, Adaline. I need you at the table this morning." "Ma'am." "Sit." Adaline sat. She sat with her hands in her lap, palms up, because her grandfather had told her once, when they call you to sit down out of the ordinary, keep your hands where you can see them, not to fight, just so your body remembers you have hands. Silas came down next, boots already on, hat in his hand. He did not look at her. He set the hat on the sideboard. He poured his own coffee, and he stood behind his mother's chair like a man who had already been told what was about to happen. Bram came last. He came slow, down the stairs 1 step at a time. He was 22 years old and had never learned to walk fast. He did not look at anyone. He leaned in the doorway. He did not sit. Vera folded her hands on a piece of paper. Adaline had not seen the paper before. It had not been on the table when she laid the plates. It had come with Vera. From the tissue paper chest, maybe. or from the desk in the front room. It was folded twice. It looked like a piece of ledger paper. It was written on in an ink she recognized. The ink from the office in Silver Fork, which meant somebody had ridden to town yesterday, and nobody had told her, which was the first thing that made her understand. Adaline, Vera said. Her voice was not unkind. It was not kind either. It was flat the way a piece of tin is flat. The household has been restructured. Adaline did not answer. There was no question in the sentence to answer. Your father's estate has settled. The mortgages have been paid. The books are clean. We have been able to make some decisions about the coming season. Yes, ma'am. The pantry room off the kitchen is needed for stores. We will be laying in more flour this year, and more sugar, and the seed for the new south pasture. It is not practical to have a bed in there. Adaline waited. You are of age, Adaline. You are 19. You are unmarried. Under the terms of your father's second marriage, you do not hold any legal share in the property. This is the law. It is not my law. It is the law. Yes, ma'am. We have arranged for you to be conveyed to the eastern grazing. There is a shack there. It stands beside the old well at Juniper Wells. You are familiar with it. No, ma'am. Vera looked up. She had not expected the correction. You have never been out to that piece? No, ma'am. Well, it is standing. It has a stove. There is water. You will be provided with what you need to make a beginning. Bram will drive the wagon. Silas will follow in a day or two with any further arrangements. There is nothing punitive in this. I want you to understand that we are giving you the eastern grazing to consider your future as you see fit. Yes, ma'am. Silence. Vera slid the paper across the table. You may read it if you wish. Adaline did not touch the paper. She read what she could of it, from where it lay. The handwriting was Silas's. The signatures at the bottom were 3. Vera Colton, Silas Colton, Bram Colton. The paper was not signed by her father. She had known that before she looked. But she looked anyway, because a person who did not look was a person who let others tell her what she had seen. Where is my father this morning? He is by the stove in the front room. He has not been well. May I speak to him? He is not receiving. You know that. Adaline sat with her hands still in her lap, palms still up. Ma'am, she said, may I ask one thing? Yes. When was the paper drawn? Vera did not look at Silas, which was how Adaline knew. Yesterday afternoon. Yesterday afternoon. Yes. And I was not called to town. You were not needed in town. No, ma'am. She sat a moment longer. She did not want to stand up too quick. Standing up too quick could look like she was fleeing. And she was not going to flee. She was going to walk. Because her grandfather had taught her the shape of a proper leaving. Walk out of a room the same way you walked into it. Slower if you can. May I go pack my things? You may. There is a wagon waiting. Bram is ready when you are. Yes, ma'am. She stood. She pushed her chair in. She did not look at Silas. She did not look at Bram in the doorway. She went past her stepmother and past the sideboard and past the door to the front room where her father sat, and she did not stop. Not yet. She wanted to look at one thing first. The desk in the office where Silas kept the books was through the front hall. She turned that way. Bram watched her go. He did not stop her. The office door was not closed. The lamp was still lit from last night's writing. And the big green ledger, the one Adaline had kept for her father since she was 14, the one whose columns she knew by heart, the one that listed every acre and every head and every dollar the ranch had owned since 1876. The ledger was open. Silas had not put it away. She stood in the doorway and looked at it from 10 feet. Then she walked in and looked at it from 6 inches. Under the section marked heirs and dependents, her name had been written in her own hand 2 years back. Adaline Merriman, daughter, natural issue. It was there. She could see the letters. But there was a line through them now. A single clean line drawn in fresh black ink. not by her hand, and beside the crossed-out name in Silas's writing 3 words. Removed. Vera Colton. Dated the 14th. Which was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. 3 weeks she had been feeding these people breakfast, and not knowing. 3 weeks she had been drawing their water. 3 weeks she had been walking through this house, as if she still lived in it. She stood very still. She did not touch the ledger. She looked at the line, through her name, until she was sure she had memorized it. Because when a person shows you what they are willing to do to you, you look at it plain. You do not turn away, so that later, when they try to tell you it was not what it was, you will have your own eye to trust. She turned. She went past Bram in the doorway. She went to the pantry off the kitchen. She got her canvas bag from under the cot. Into it she put her second dress, her wool stockings, her Bible, her paring knife with the bone handle, the tin of matches her grandfather had given her, her hair comb, a folded cloth for washing, a needle and a spool of black thread, and her mother's silver thimble, which she had kept in a wrap of cotton for 9 years. She put on her coat. She put on her hat. She lifted the strap of the dented tin canteen over her head and settled it across her shoulder, so the tin rode against her ribs, where it had ridden for 4 years. And she felt, through her shirt, for the small hard rectangle of the leather pouch stitched to the strap. The pouch that held Gideon's letter. For lines, on paper gone soft, as cloth at the folds. The letter was there. It had never not been there. But she checked, because she was a woman about to walk into empty country. And a woman about to walk into empty country checks the things she cannot afford to lose. She went back through the kitchen. Vera had not moved from the head of the table. Silas had gone out to the yard. Bram had gone out to the wagon. Adaline stopped at the door to the front room. Her father was in his chair by the stove. He was 71 years old that April. His hair had gone white the winter her mother died. His hands had gone soft as paper the year after that. He had not stood up from that chair in 6 weeks. His breath was the loud, slow breath of a man whose lungs were full of something a doctor could not name. She did not go in. She stood in the doorway. "Papa." He did not turn his head. "Papa, I am going now." His eyes closed. They stayed closed. She understood. She understood the whole shape of it. That he had known. That he had not been able to say. That the man who had taught her to sit a horse, and to read the weather, and to hold her own name against any wind was, at the last, only a very old man in a chair by a stove. And that he was ashamed. And that his shame was the last gift he had left to give her. Because a father who was ashamed was a father who had not stopped loving his child. It was only a father who had run out of hands. She stood in the doorway one breath longer. Then she said, "I love you, Papa." His eyes stayed closed, but his mouth moved, and she thought, later, when she had time to think anything. She thought he had said her name, once, under his breath. Adaline. But she could not be sure. She was never going to be sure, and she was going to have to learn to live with not being sure. She turned. She walked out through the kitchen. She walked past Vera without looking at her. She walked across the yard to the wagon. She did not look back at the house. She looked once at the far ridge, where Gideon's stone cabin still stood empty against the sky. Then she climbed up onto the plank seat and set her bag between her boots. And she waited for Bram to click to the horse. He clicked. The wagon moved, and the house of her father slid slow behind her out of the frame of her seeing. And she did not turn her head to watch it go. The wagon rode out of the valley, climbed for the whole of that first morning. Pine on both sides. Smell of resin warming as the sun came over the ridge. Bram drove with his hat pulled low. He smoked one cigarette, then another, then a third. He did not offer her one. He would not have. She would not have taken it. But the not offering sat in the wagon between them like a third passenger. She did not speak. She had learned young not to fill a silence just because a silence was uncomfortable. Silences did not need filling. Silences told you what a person was made of if you let them run long enough. Bram was made of silence. She had suspected as much for years. Now she knew. The land rose, the pines began to thin, and her mind, which she had been holding still and useful all morning, began to loosen at the edges. And the past came up in her the way water comes up in a well you have not drawn from in a while. Slow, cold, all at once. Her mother had died the spring Adaline was 10. Her name had been Iris. Iris Fairchild before she married Henry Merriman. Iris was Gideon's only daughter, and had been the light of him in the way an only daughter sometimes is the light of a man who has come home from a long war. Iris had been a schoolteacher for 2 years in the settlement at Elk Fork before she met Henry. She had kept teaching Adaline her letters at the kitchen table on winter mornings even after the baby came, and even after the small holding got harder to run. Adaline could still see the shape of her mother's hand on the slate, the small clean loops of the letters, the way she would tap the chalk twice on the corner of the slate before she began, and she could still smell the wool of her mother's shawl, and the peppermint she kept in her apron pocket for the days when a child needed reminding that the world contained sweet things. The fever came out of nowhere. It went through the mountain settlements in 3 days like a wind. It took Iris on the morning of the 4th day. Adaline had been in the room. Henry had not let her come close. Gideon had come down from the ridge that same morning and had stood at the foot of the bed. And he had not said anything. He had only put his hand on his daughter's forehead once, and then had turned, and had walked out of the house, and had gone out to the barn. And Adaline had heard him, from the kitchen, through 2 walls. She had heard him make the sound a man makes when he is trying not to make a sound. And she had understood at 10 years old that grief was a private thing a person did in a barn, where nobody could see. Henry had not been the same after that. He had done his work. He had kept the ranch. He had put food on the table. But the light in him had gone out. And a man with the light gone out was a man who did not notice what came into his house next. What came in was Vera Colton. She had been the widow of a cattle broker from Ridgeway. She was a handsome woman in her 40s with 2 grown sons and a way of standing in a room that took up more space than her body took up. She had come to the ranch first as a caller, then as a friend, then as the woman who managed the household accounts. Henry had married her the spring after Iris's 3rd summer in the ground. Adaline had been 13, and the day the wedding party rode back from the church at Elk Fork Adaline had known, without being told, the way a horse knows the smell of smoke before the fire is visible, that she was now the 4th person in a house that had room for 3. Silas and Bram had come with their mother. Silas was already 18 then, loud, wide across the shoulders, a young man who moved through rooms like he owned them because his mother had told him from the day he could walk that he did. Bram was 16, softer, quieter, given to sitting on the porch with a book he did not read, and to watching. He watched a great deal. Adaline had never learned what he did with what he watched. Vera had moved Adaline out of her upstairs room within 6 weeks. It was needed for Silas, she had said. A young man needs his own space. Adaline's things had been carried downstairs to the small room off the kitchen that had been Iris's pantry. There had been a cot put in it, a hook driven into the wall for her coat, and the door had been fitted with a latch that closed from the inside, because Vera had said a young girl needs her privacy. Adaline had understood that too, what a latch that closed from the inside meant, what a young man moving through rooms he owned meant. She had asked Gideon. She had ridden up to the ridge one Saturday. She was 14. She had told him, not everything. She had not known how to say everything, but enough. Gideon had listened. He had not interrupted. He had let her use her own words. When she was done, he had gone to the shelf in his cabin and taken down the dented tin canteen that had been Army issue in a war he did not name. And he had cleaned it, and he had oiled the leather of its strap, and he had stitched a small pouch to that strap with wax thread and a curved needle, and he had put the canteen in her hands. This has been across every summer of my working life, he had said. It is the one thing I know will not fail. You will carry it now. You will fill it every morning. You will drink from it during the day. And when the water is low, you will bring it back to me, and I will teach you how to find water where there is none showing, which is a thing every woman ought to know, in this country, especially. Grandpa, what about the other thing? He had looked at her a long moment. The latch on that door, he had said. The one that closes from the inside. Use it, every night, without exception. Do you hear me? Yes, sir. And you come up to this ridge every Saturday, from now until you are grown. Do you hear me? Yes, sir. And if a day comes when the latch is not enough, you come up to this ridge that day, not the Saturday, that day. Do you hear? Yes, sir. He had put his hand on the top of her head. Once. Rough. The way a man does, who has not been taught to be gentle, but wishes he had been. You come from stock that does not break, he had said. Remember that, when they tell you different. She had ridden home. She had used the latch every night. She had gone up to the ridge every Saturday for a year. And Gideon had taught her. In that year and the year after and the year after that. He had taught her to sight a rifle, to draw water from a dry country well by patience and a weighted line, to read a landscape for the small dark stains that meant a spring lay beneath, to keep a ledger in a hand, so plain no man could argue with the figures, to shoe a horse, to set a broken fence, to butcher and salt a mule deer without help, and most importantly to know the difference between a man who was safe to be near and a man who was not, and to trust her knowing, even when the knowing came before the reason. Then in the winter of her 15th year Gideon had gone to bed, with a chest cough, and had not gotten up. Adaline had ridden up to the ridge on a Thursday, not a Saturday, the day, because he had told her, if a day comes, when the latch is not enough, come the day. And she had known, without a rider bringing word, that the day had come. She had ridden, through snow up to her mare's chest. She had come into the cabin, and Gideon had been sitting up in his bed, with his back against the wall. He had smiled when he saw her. He had said, "Girl, you came fast." And he had put into her hand the letter he had already written, 4 lines on a piece of paper the size of a folded playing card. He had made her read it aloud there in the cabin, so he would know she could read his hand. She had read it, twice. He had nodded. He had said her name, once, Adaline. Then he had gone to sleep, and he had not woken again. She had ridden down from the ridge, with the letter buttoned inside her coat. She had put it into the leather pouch stitched to the canteen strap, that same night, and it had ridden against her ribs every day of the 4 years since. The wagon jolted over a root. Bram did not look at her. Adaline came back to the present the way a diver comes back to the surface. Slow, blinking against the light. They were over the divide. She had not noticed the climb ending. The pines had given up behind them. The land ahead was the long dry flat that ran east under a sky pale enough to bleach a cloth on. She had heard about this country in drovers talk all her life. She had never seen it. It was bigger than she had understood a country could be. It made the wagon feel like a small dark bug crawling across the palm of a hand. Bram drove. He did not speak. At 3 in the afternoon he stopped in the middle of the flat. He did not step down. He handed her the sack of cornmeal, the paper twist of salt, the folded gray blanket. He pointed with his chin at something on the far edge of the visible ground. A dark thread, maybe 5 miles off, maybe 6, broken shape against the sky. That's the shack, he said. That's the well beside it. His voice was low, rough, as if he had not used it in a week. She realized. Perhaps he had not. Yes. You know how to draw water from a well. I do. You know how to lay a fire without much dry. I do. You know how to keep. He did not finish the sentence. She did not ask him to. I know how to keep, Bram. He nodded. Once. He turned the wagon in a wide slow arc. He clicked to the horse, and the wagon began to move back west the way they had come. She watched it go. She had thought she was ready to watch it go. She was not. It was a hard thing to watch. A wagon leaving you in country you did not know. With 4 days of walking in any direction, before there was another human roof. Her chest tightened. She did not let it show on her face. There was no one to show it to, but she had trained herself. And she trained herself now, not to show it. Even to the sky. The wagon was 50 yards off. When Bram pulled up, she saw him hesitate on the seat. He turned his head. He did not look at her. He looked past her at the flat behind her. Then he reached down into the box under his boots. He pulled out a small canvas bundle, bound with jute twine, about the size of a loaf of bread. He held it a moment in his hand. Then he threw it, underhand, short, landed in the grass about 10 feet in front of her. He did not say anything. He did not wait for her to pick it up. He clicked to the horse again. The wagon moved, and this time it did not stop. It rolled slow west across the pale ground, until it was a dark speck folding itself into the pine line. And then not even that. She stood in the grass a long time before she went to the bundle. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. She untied the jute twine with her teeth, because her hands were full of the sack and the blanket. She unrolled the canvas. Inside were 3 extra boxes of lucifer matches wrapped in oil paper, a coil of good waxed fishing line with 2 barbed hooks stuck into a cork, a skinning knife with a bone handle and a leather sheath, a small square of flint, a folded strip of dried, jerked venison the length of her hand, and a piece of hard tack the size of a saucer wrapped in a rag. There was no note. There was not going to be a note. Bram was not a man who wrote notes. Bram was not going to explain himself. Not to her. Not to his brother when he got home. Not to himself in the dark of his own room later on. He had done the thing his mother had asked. He had driven the wagon. He had said none of the words that might have stopped it. And then, at the last moment at 50 yards off when nobody would ever know, he had thrown into the grass a bundle of the things a person needed to not die in open country. Because he could not carry, all the way back to the ranch, the shape of what would happen to her without them. It was not rescue. She understood that clear. It was a man buying himself a smaller version of his own sleep for the rest of his life. She took it anyway. She rolled the canvas back around the goods. She retied the twine. She put the bundle into her canvas bag on top of her second dress. She lifted the sack of cornmeal onto her shoulder. She slung the blanket over the canteen strap. She settled the weight so it would ride. And she began to walk toward the dark broken shape on the far edge of the flat. 5 miles. Maybe 6. Sun leaning to the west and turning the light long and gold. Her shadow stretched out beside her taller than a 19-year-old girl had any business being. She walked with the even measured step of a person who had learned young that speed used water. And water was life. She drank once, small, from the dented tin. She rolled the water across her tongue before she swallowed it. The old lesson came back. Water is a language. Learn to hear what it says. Cold water in an empty country says, "You are not dead yet." Warm water says the same thing, but says it louder. She kept walking. The shack did not seem to come closer for a long time. Then all at once, in the way distances behave in that country, it was closer, and she could see the sag of its roof, and the bleached gray of its plank walls, and the low round shape of the well beside it, standing black against the last of the daylight. She reached it in the last blue hour before full dark. She came up to it slow, watching the ground for sign, and the doorway for shadow, and the roof line for what a place had done in the wind. The shack sat on a low rise of hard-packed dirt. The well 6 paces off its north side. No fence, no corral, no other structure anywhere in the visible mile. It was about 12 feet by 14. Single pitch roof sloping toward the back. Milled plank, which meant somebody in some earlier time had cared enough about the spot to freight the plank in from a long way off. The planks had gone the color of old bone. The nails had wept rust down the wood. The roof sagged in the middle, where a joist had given, but had not broken through. The tar paper on top was cracked, but mostly whole. The door hung on 2 of its 3 hinges. The third had pulled its screws and left a small pail wound in the jamb. There was no glass in the one window, only a square hole with a piece of oilcloth tacked half across it, curling at the edges. The stovepipe still stood on the roof, canted a little, capped with a rusted tin hat. She set her sack down beside the doorway. She went first to the well, because water came before shelter. The well was old country work, a round of dry, fitted stone rising 2 feet above the ground, capped by a plank lid weighted with a flat river rock the size of a pie tin. She lifted the rock off, set it careful in the grass, slid the lid aside. She could not see the water in the failing light, but she could smell it, cold, mineral, clean. She could feel the cool of it rising against her face like the breath of another person she had not known was in the room. A length of hemp rope was coiled on a peg driven into the stone. A tin bucket hung from the peg beside it, dented on one side but whole. She let the bucket down. Slow, hand over hand. She felt it strike. She felt it tip and fill and grow heavy. She drew it up hand over hand again. She set it on the stone rim. She looked at what she had. Water, clear, cold, faintly sweet with the taste of rock. She drank from her cupped palm. Then she drank again. Then she filled the dented tin canteen to its neck. She set it on the stone. And she stood in the last of the daylight beside a well she had never seen before. In a country she had never seen before, with a canteen full of water, and a piece of hard tack in her bag, and the letter of her grandfather against her ribs. And she felt for the first time, since Vera had folded the paper under the sugar bowl, that she was going to live through this night. She would think later that this was the moment, not the ledger, not the doorway of her father's front room, not the wagon pulling away, the well, the cold breath of it against her face, and the taste of the water on her tongue. That was the moment she began to be a person no one had counted on her being. She turned. She drew a second bucket. She lifted her sack. She went to the door. It scraped open against the sill with a sound like a slow breath. Inside was one room. The floor was plank laid on joists set on stone piers. The boards had gone dark, with old smoke and grease and years of boot dirt. Some had cupped, some had split, but the floor was whole and did not give under her weight. A small iron cook stove sat against the back wall, no bigger than a foot locker, its lid loose but its firebox sound. A plank bunk was built into the north wall, 4 feet by 6. Rope webbing sagged and dusty across the frame. A 3-legged stool leaned against the south wall beside a shelf that held a tin cup, a cracked plate, a rusted skillet, a stub of candle in a saucer, and a small folded square of oilcloth. On a nail above the shelf hung a coil of baling wire and a hand-forged fire hook. In the corner beside the stove was a wooden crate half full of split kindling gone gray, with age but dry. Above the door, scratched into the header plank, was a date, 1842. The place had stood there 41 years. She did not sit down. She set the bucket inside the door. She went back out for her sack and her blanket. She brought them in. She closed the door behind her. She struck one of Gideon's matches on the iron of the stove. She lit the candle stub. The little flame steadied and pushed the dark back into the corners. And she saw the place proper for the first time. It was poor. It was worn. It was small, but it had 4 walls and a roof, and a stove and a bunk, and a floor, and outside its door was clean cold water. She stood in the middle of the room with the candle in her hand, and she felt something under the tiredness, something her grandfather had had a name for. He had called it standing. She unrolled the blanket on the bunk. She opened the sack. She measured a small handful of cornmeal into the tin cup. She set water to boil on the stove, after she had gathered old kindling, into the firebox and lit it. And while the fire took, she sat on the 3-legged stool. She ate a spoon of dry meal. She drank cold water. She watched the small orange light through the seam of the stove door. and she let her hands stop shaking. She had not known her hands were shaking. She would not have said, if asked, that her hands were shaking. But they had been, all day, since Vera had said sit down at the kitchen table. And now, at last, in the yellow light of a candle stub in a shack, whose door she could latch, from the inside, they were quiet. And they lay in her lap. She slept that first night in her coat, on the ropes of the bunk, with the canteen against her ribs, and Gideon's letter folded soft against her breastbone. And she did not dream. Outside, the wind moved once across the plank walls in one long soft pass. Somewhere out in the grass, a coyote called, once, and went quiet, and 19-year-old Adaline Merriman, who 3 weeks ago had had her name crossed out of a ledger in her own house, and who had this morning been driven 5 miles into open country and dropped like a bundle of tools, slept for the first time in 7 years behind a door that only she could open. Which was the moment she had stopped being a girl her father's family was ashamed of, and had become, without knowing yet, the woman at Juniper Wells. She woke before first light, out of habit, out of 7 years of habit. A body that had risen at 4 in someone else's kitchen did not stop rising at 4 just because the kitchen had changed. She lay a while listening. Wind on the plank walls. Somewhere out in the grass a coyote calling once. Going quiet. That was all. She sat up slow. She swung her legs off the bunk. The rope webbing creaked. She set her boots on the plank floor. She listened again. Nothing. She was alone. She was alone in a shack in a piece of country the size of a small county. And she had lived through the first night. She stood. She stretched. She rolled her shoulders once. She went to the door. She lifted the latch. She stepped out. The sky in the east was the color of a bruise going yellow at the edges. The grass ran silver away from her boots. The well stood quiet in its low round of stone. The whole visible world was one color, and another color, and no color at all. She had never in her life stood in a piece of country this empty. It should have frightened her. It did not, because a country that empty did not care who you had been. Which was, she understood, standing in her coat in the cold grass at first light, a kind of mercy she had never been offered before. She drew fresh water. She drank. She set a small fire in the stove. She boiled a cup of meal into thin mush. She ate it standing. Old habit. She would break it later. She did not have the energy yet to break habits. Then she went out and looked at the country by day. The flat ran east for a mile, then began to rise in low broken hills that carried a scatter of pinyon, and a dark line she thought was a dry wash cutting north. To the south the flat ran unbroken to the horizon. To the west the pine line she had come through stood 5 or 6 miles off, blue with distance. No smoke, no horses, no riders, only her, and the well, and the shack. She sat down on the stone rim of the well. She let herself understand it. She had 10 days of meal if she was careful, 12 if she stretched. She had jerked venison and hardtack from Bram's bundle for maybe 5 days more. She had water that came up cold and clean from a hole in the ground somebody had dug 41 years ago. She had a coat, a blanket, canteen, a skinning knife, 3 boxes of matches, a canvas bag, and a letter. She had no plan. She had no horse. She had no idea what she was going to do when the meal ran out, but she had, and a person who had, was a person who was not yet done. She stood up. She dusted her skirt. She went back inside. Because a woman with hands busy was a woman not afraid. She swept the floor first. With a handful of bunched sage she tied, with a strip torn, from the hem of her second dress. The sage smelled clean when it broke. It smelled of the ridge above her grandfather's cabin. She had to sit down on the stool for a minute, after she noticed. Then she stood up and finished sweeping. She wiped the shelf. She took down the tin cup, the cracked plate, the rusted skillet, the stub of candle in its saucer. She wiped each one and set it back in order. She took the folded oilcloth square from the shelf and shook it out in the doorway and saw it was big enough to patch the window. She reseated the stovepipe in its collar. She tightened the loose lid on the firebox. With a strip of the baling wire she took down from the nail. She worked steady through the whole morning. She did not stop to eat. By noon the shack was clean. The fire was low and even. The bucket was full. The bunk was made. She sat on the stool and drank water and looked at the floor. The floor. The floor was where a person hid a thing in a place like this. That was one of the old lessons. Back at the stone cabin on the ridge, they had pulled up a rotten board once to reset a joist, and had found under it a small tin of buttons, and a photograph of a man neither of them knew. People who lived alone in far places, her grandfather had said, put their small treasures under the boards, because thieves looked in the walls, and the roof, and the stove, and never thought to kneel. Adaline knelt. She went along the floor board by board, tapping with the handle of her paring knife, listening for the difference between a board bedded firm on its joist and a board that sat over empty air. Most of the boards rang the same low dull note, until, under the bunk, hidden in the shadow where the frame met the wall, one board answered different. It gave back a hollow answer that sounded to her ear trained by all those years of tapping on cabin floors and horses' hooves. Like a small room underneath. She sat back on her heels. She had not expected to find anything. She had tapped the boards the way a person says a prayer they have half stopped believing in. And now, her breath had gone light. She was in trouble. She was in trouble, because if there was nothing under this board, she was going to be more disappointed than she could afford to be, in a shack 5 miles from the nearest human being. On day 2 of a life she had not chosen. She almost stood up. She almost put the knife away, and told herself she had imagined the hollow ring. Except a woman who put the knife away was a woman who had decided in advance she was not worth what might be under the board. And she had spent 7 years being that woman. And she was done. She moved the bunk out from the wall, an inch at a time, until she could reach the board plane. It was a board like the others, roughly 10 inches wide, 3 feet long. Its nails, when she looked close, had been pulled and reset more than once. The heads sat a little proud. Around each was a faint pale ring, where the wood had been worked. Somebody had lifted this board before. Somebody who had known what was under it. She fitted the tip of the paring knife under the near end. She pried. The board came up with a small dry sigh. She lifted it out. She set it aside. She looked down into the dark. She had to strike another match to see. She struck it on the iron of the stove and held it low. And she saw, in the space between the joists, on a bed of dry sand somebody had poured their years back to keep the wood from rot, lay 2 things. A tin box of the sort that had once held tea. A little more than a foot long, half that wide, its lid painted with faded roses. And beside the box, a folded oilskin packet, tied with jute twine. The match burned down to her fingers. She did not feel it. She struck another. She reached in with her free hand. She lifted the tin box out first, because it was closer. She set it on the plank floor beside her knee. Then she lifted the oilskin packet. She set it beside the box. She sat back on her heels. She looked at the 2 things. She did not open either one for a long moment. Her hands were steady now. They had been shaking last night. This morning they were steady. That was information. She filed it. Outside the wind moved across the plank walls in one long soft pass. Inside the candle stub on the shelf burned low. She had lit it against the shadow of the floorboards. She had not remembered lighting it. She put her hand on the lid of the tea tin. She lifted it. Inside, wrapped in a piece of soft blue calico, lay coins. Gold coins mostly. $20 double eagles stacked in short columns. Smaller pieces tucked between. A few silver dollars along the bottom edge. And one thin folded packet of paper currency in a denomination she had rarely seen. She did not count them yet. She did not need to. She lifted a single double eagle. She turned it in the candlelight. She saw the eagle sharp and unworn on its face. She could hear her own heartbeat in the small bones behind her ears. She set the coin back gentle where it had lain. She folded the blue calico back over the money. She put the lid on the tin. She set the tin on the floor beside her knee. Then she untied the jute twine on the oilskin packet. She unfolded the oilskin. Inside she found 4 things. A small daguerreotype in a hinged case. A folded map of the country east of the divide, drawn in careful ink on a piece of ledger paper. A schoolbook. A McGuffey reader. The 1857 edition. Its cover worn soft at the corners. And a letter. 4 pages. Written in a plain schoolhouse hand. On paper gone soft at the folds. She opened the daguerreotype first. She did not know why she opened it first. Maybe because a picture was easier to look at than a letter. Maybe because she wanted to see the face of the person who had put these things here, before she read what the person had wanted to say. The case fell open in her palm. 2 people. A wedding portrait. Standing side by side. He was a thin young man in a dark coat, with his hair combed severe. She was a young woman in a white bonnet, with her hands folded in her lap. She was sitting. He was standing behind her chair. His hand was on her shoulder, very lightly, as if he was afraid to weigh on her. Adaline looked at the woman a long time. The woman was maybe 21 in the picture. Her mouth was small and firm. Her eyes were pale. She looked steady out of the picture. She looked like a woman who would not lie to a child. Adaline closed the daguerreotype. She set it beside the tin. She picked up the letter. She unfolded the 4 pages. She held them to the candle. She began to read. My name is Ottilie Whitcomb. Most called me Tilda. I was born in the state of Illinois in the year 1820, and I taught in the district school at Milford, from the age of 16 to the age of 21. I loved that work. I want to say it plain. I loved it more than any other work I have done in my life. I taught 40 children to read. I taught them to spell their own names in a hand nobody could argue with. I taught them the multiplication table up through the 12s, and the map of the states, and the difference between a fact and a story someone had told them. Adaline stopped. She read the paragraph again. She had not expected the letter to begin with school. She read on. In the summer of my 21st year I married Amos Whitcomb. He was a wheelwright from Greene County. He was a good man. He was kind to me. I want to say that plain too, because what happened next was not his doing, and I do not want you to think it was. The trustees of the district school at Milford came to my house the week after we were married and told me my position was terminated. They said the county had passed a marriage bar the previous winter. A married woman could not hold a teaching position. It was the law. It was not their law. It was the law. That is what they said. I remember the wording exact, because I have thought about it every day since. I want you to know that when a person tells you it is not their law, it is the law. They are telling you they have chosen not to fight for you. They are telling you they have counted the cost. And you were on the wrong side of the ledger. Remember that, when they say it, which they will. Adaline sat still. She was aware she had stopped breathing. She made herself breathe. She read on. Amos and I came out to this country in the spring of 1841, because there was no work for me in Milford anymore, and Amos said the West would not care about the marriage bar. He was right about that. The West did not care about the marriage bar. But it also did not care about anything else, and I want you to know that too. The West is not merciful. It is only large, which is not the same thing, though people confuse the two. We built this shack in the summer of 42. Amos milled the plank himself and freighted it in with a borrowed team. We filed a claim on this ground in his name because a woman could not file in her own. We ran 40 head of sheep on the flat for 3 years, and a small dairy, and I mended for the drovers passing through on the cattle road. Amos died in the winter of 49 of a sickness in his chest that no doctor could name. He was 33 years old. We had no children. The claim on the ground lapsed after his death because I had no money to refile it, and the land office at Silver Fork would not accept my name on the paper regardless. So I stayed here without a claim, and I worked, and I saved, and I lived. I lived here alone for 21 years after Amos went. I want you to picture that. I want you to picture one woman in one room for 21 years. I did the washing for the drovers when they came through in the spring and the fall. I mended their coats. I baked bread and sold it for a nickel a loaf. I drew water from this well for any man who was thirsty and could pay a penny, and for any man who was thirsty and could not pay at all. I saved everything I could. I put it in this tin. I have added to the tin twice from money paid to me by a mining survey out of Denver in '68, and again in '72. They came through and looked at this piece of ground and found nothing they wanted, but paid me for the trouble of their crossing. I took the money because I understood by then that money is the one thing a woman in this country can put between herself and what men decide about her. And I want you to have that money. Adaline put the letter down. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She had not meant to. She picked the letter back up. I have thought a long while about who you would be. I do not know your name. I hope you are a woman, because a woman alone in this country has had the hardest walk to get here, and the money will do her the most good. I hope you are young enough to use it for a life. Take the coins. Take the map. It shows the wagon road north to the settlement at Silver Fork, where the land office keeps a clerk who is honest. His name is Ezra Bland. If he is still living. If he is not, ask for whoever sits at his desk, and file the claim on this ground in your own name. The filing costs $12. Do not let anyone tell you it costs more. The country is good country. The well is a true well. It will be yours if you claim it. Take the McGuffey. It was mine when I was a girl. I taught out of it for 5 years, and I have kept it these 42 years since. If you have children someday, or if any children come by your door, you will know what to do with it. I have done one other thing you should know about. I have not told anyone this, because the person I am telling has not been born, yet as I write this, and I do not know if the telling will still matter when she reads. But I want to say it in case. In the summer of 1873 I rode into Silver Fork alone. I went into the land office. I sat with Ezra Bland for 2 hours. I asked him if there was any way for a woman, without a claim to guarantee, that the well on this ground stayed open to any drover who came by, regardless of who filed on the land afterward. He said yes. He said there was a thing called an easement of water. He said if I filed the paper right and paid the fee and had a notary sign it, the easement would hold for all time, or as close to all time as the courts of this territory could make it. I paid the fee. I filed the paper. I had it notarized. Ezra Bland put it in the drawer of his desk, where the permanent papers go. He said it would be there, as long as the land office at Silver Fork stood. Adaline's hand tightened on the paper. I did not do it for myself. I would not live long enough to need it. I did it because I understood that a well in this country is not a thing one person owns. A well is a promise you make to the next person who is thirsty, and promises like that ought to be written down, where no man who inherits the ground can undo them. You may need that paper someday. You may not. Go to Silver Fork. Ask Ezra Bland if he remembers Ottilie Whitcomb. He will. Ask him for the easement filed in the summer of '73. He will get you a certified copy for 50 cents. Take the picture. It is of Amos and me on the day of our wedding. Keep it if you like, or bury it under the well, whichever seems right to you. And when you have set yourself up, put a little of the money by for the next person, because that is how a country like this one gets kept alive. Not by the men who file the claims, by the women who put a coin in a tin under a floor and wait. My name is Ottilie Whitcomb. I lived in this one room for 31 years, 10 with Amos, 21 alone. I hope you live long. Yours truly. Adaline set the letter down on her knee. She did not weep, not yet, but she sat a long time with the 4 pages open on her lap, and the candle burning low, and the wind moving on the plank walls. And she thought of Ottilie Whitcomb standing in the doorway of her mother's kitchen at 21, hearing 3 men in coats tell her a law had been passed. And she thought of Ottilie riding into Silver Fork alone at 53 to sign a paper that would keep a well open to strangers for as long as the courts would let it. And she thought of Gideon Fairchild in the stone cabin on the ridge, writing 4 lines in a schoolhouse hand, and stitching them into a leather pouch against a granddaughter he would not see grown. She understood, sitting there on the plank floor, with 2 dead people's writing on her lap, that she was at the meeting of 2 long, slow acts of love, from 2 people who had never known each other, and never would, and that the country she had been thrown into to die had instead handed her a grandfather, and a grandmother she had not asked for, which was, she thought, the closest thing to a family a 19-year-old girl, with a crossed-out name had any right to expect. She sat with the letter until the candle burned itself out. Then she stood. She wrapped the coins back in the calico. She put the lid on the tin. She retied the oilskin packet with the jute twine. Except for the letter. She kept the letter out. And the McGuffey. And the picture. She slid the tin back into the space between the joists. She fitted the board back down over it. She drove the pulled nails back into their pale rings with the flat of the knife handle. She pushed the bunk against the wall so the seams lay in shadow. She kept out 1 double eagle and 1 silver dollar. She put them in the small drawstring bag her mother had used for her thimble. She kept out the map. She kept out the daguerreotype. She kept out the letter. She put all 4 things into the leather pouch stitched to the canteen strap. Beside Gideon's letter, there was just room. Then she sat down on the stool. And she drank cold water. And she watched the last light go blue in the window. And she said, aloud to the empty room, because the room had listened to her all afternoon, and deserved to be spoken to. Miss Ottilie, ma'am, I am obliged to you. She left the shack at first light on a Wednesday. She pulled the door to. She set the flat river rock back on the well cap. She turned her face north. And she began to walk. 22 miles. Ottilie's map said. Through low broken hills. 1 dry wash. 1 shallow crossing at a slow creek, where cottonwoods grew in a small green line. She walked all day. She drank small from the canteen. She ate a strip of Bram's jerked venison at noon standing in the shade of a boulder. She kept walking through the long afternoon. She reached the shallow crossing at dusk. She slept beside it in her coat, with the canteen on her chest, and the leather pouch against her breastbone. The cottonwoods murmured over her all night. She did not dream. She walked all the next day. She reached Silver Fork at dusk of the second day. It was a settlement of 19 frame buildings, and a livery and a land office with a green shutter. She had not seen a town in 3 months. She stood at the edge of it for a minute looking at the yellow squares of the windows. She had forgotten what a town looked like, from the outside. It looked smaller than she remembered. A boy of about 12 came out of the livery, and saw her. He was small for his age. He had a mop of dark hair that had not been cut in some months. He wore a shirt that had been his father's and was still too big. "Ma'am, evening. You looking for a bed?" "I am. 10 cents in the loft. Aunt Mira runs the house, but she don't take walk-ins after dark. Loft is clean. There's hay. I keep the horses. My name is Toby Rusk." "Adaline Merriman." "Ma'am, 10 cents is fair. Here." She gave him the silver dollar. "Ma'am, I can't make change on that till morning. Keep it. I will need feed for a horse in the morning, and I will need you to point me at the land office when it opens. And I would like a hot cup of coffee, if there is any to be had." "Yes, ma'am." He looked at the dollar in his palm. He looked at her. "Ma'am." "Yes. You come far." "I came from the eastern grazing." "Alone?" "Yes." He did not ask any more. He led her into the livery. He showed her the loft ladder. He brought her a tin cup of coffee that had been on the stove too long. Tasted like burned metal. She drank it all. She thanked him. She slept in the loft, with her canteen under her cheek, and her leather pouch flat against her breastbone. And she dreamed, once, of her grandfather. He was sitting on the stone rim of the well at Juniper Wells. He was smiling. He did not say anything. He did not need to. She was at the land office when it opened at 8. Ezra Bland was still living. He was 68 years old. Thin. White-side whiskers. a black sleeve garter on his left arm, reading spectacles on a black cord around his neck. He wore a green eyeshade even indoors. He was pouring coffee from a china pot into a china cup when she came through the door and the bell over the door rang. He looked up. "Mississippi, sir. Have a seat." She sat. She put the leather pouch on the desk between them. She untied the drawstring. She took out Ottilie's letter. She unfolded the 4 pages. She turned them and slid them across. "Sir, I need to ask you to read this." He put on his spectacles. He read. He read all 4 pages without speaking. When he was done, he took off his spectacles. He set them on the desk. He rubbed the bridge of his nose with his thumb and finger. He looked at Adaline over the desk for a long moment. "Mississippi. Yes, sir. What is your name?" "Adaline Merriman. You are of age." "I am 19. You have come from Juniper Wells." "I have." "You were placed there." "I was." "By family." "By family." He nodded once. He said nothing for a while. Then he said, "Ottilie Whitcomb came to my desk in the summer of her 53rd year. She sat where you are sitting. I told her a woman could not leave a piece of ground to a stranger. She asked me if there was another way. I told her there was one other way, the easement of water. She paid the fee. She filed the paper. I notarized it myself. It has been in the permanent drawer for 10 years. I have not thought about it in 9. Sir, is it still valid?" "Mississippi. It will be valid until the territory of Wyoming is dissolved, and the state that follows chooses to unwrite it. Which I will tell you no state has ever done. The easement of water is the oldest law we have in this country. It came from Spain by way of Mexico by way of the drovers. It is older than the United States. A court that tried to break it would be laughed off the bench. Sir, may I have a certified copy?" "Mississippi. You may have 3, at 50 cents each, and I will put a note on the file that you have taken them. So no man who comes in after you and asks about that ground learns of the easement before he learns of you." She could feel her eyes burn. She did not let it show. "Thank you, sir." "Mississippi. The ground itself. Amos Whitcomb's claim lapsed in 1849. It has lain unfiled since. You may file it in your name today. The fee is $12. That has not changed since '62. Do you have $12? She reached into the pouch. She lifted out the double eagle. She set it on the desk. Ezra Bland looked at the coin. He looked at her. "Mississippi. Where did you get this?" "Sir, from the tin under the floor of the shack at Juniper Wells, which Miss Ottilie left for me." He nodded. Once. Slow. "Mississippi. I am going to write your name on this deed in careful ink, and I am going to stamp it with the brass seal of the Territorial Land Office. And I am going to hand it to you folded. And I am going to say your name aloud twice, while I write, because it seems to me that has not happened enough lately." She could not answer. He wrote. He wrote in a hand as clear as the printing in a Bible. He said, "Adaline Merriman, of Juniper Wells." He said it a second time. He stamped the seal. He handed her the deed folded. He counted her change from the $20 in silver. 8 silver dollars. She put them in the drawstring bag with a hand that had begun to shake again, and that she did not try to hide from him. Because a man who said your name aloud twice was a man in whose office you did not have to hide the shaking of your hands. She stood. She thanked him. She turned to go. "Mississippi, sir." "One more thing." "Yes, sir." In the summer of '73, Ottilie Whitcomb rode into this office on a small red mare. She sat in your chair. She left a letter for whoever came next. I want you to know that she said when she was leaving one thing. She said, "Mr. Bland, if a young woman comes into this office someday with my letter in her hand, I want you to be kind to her, because she will have walked a long way to get here, and she will not know yet what she has done. Sir, Mississippi, I am telling you now, you have done a thing. It is a large thing. I have sat in this office 41 years. I have seen it 3 times. What you did. which is to put your hand on the lid of a tin box, and lift it, and read what a stranger wrote to you, and act on it, without waiting for a man to tell you it was permitted. She could not speak. He nodded once. Go on now. There will be a man across the street named Otis Renwick, who runs the general store. Tell him I sent you. He will not cheat you. And there is a woman up the row who runs the boarding house. Aunt Mira Halpern. She has a bay mare for sale. 15 years old. Sound. $35. Which is fair. Do not pay a penny more. Yes, sir. And miss, sir, you come back here on the first Tuesday of every month. From now on, whether you have business or not, because a woman with a piece of ground and a deed in her name ought to have a friend in this office who has seen her face regular. Do you understand? I understand, sir. Good. He turned back to his desk. She walked out of the land office of Silver Fork at 9 in the morning on a Thursday in the summer of 1883. With a folded deed in her hand, and a certified copy of Ottilie Whitcomb's easement in her pouch, and $19 and change in silver in her drawstring bag. She stood on the plank sidewalk for a minute. She looked at the street. It was the same street it had been an hour before. The same 19 frame buildings. The same yellow dust. The same 2 horses tied at the rail across the way. But she was not the same person who had walked into the office. She was Adaline Merriman of Juniper Wells. She had a deed in her hand that said so. She spent the rest of that day in Otis Renwick's general store. He was 48. He walked with a limp from the war and did not talk about it. He had a kind face and a habit of tapping his pencil on the counter twice before he wrote a number. She bought a keg of flour, a slab of bacon wrapped in muslin, a pound of coffee, a 2-gallon crock, 4 boxes of matches, a shovel, a hammer, a pound of 8-penny nails, a coil of new hemp rope, 6 panes of window glass wrapped in newspaper, and a spool of black thread. He asked her if she wanted a rifle. She said she did. He showed her a used Springfield trapdoor for $11. She held it. She sighted along it. She bought it. And a box of cartridges. She went up the row. She found Aunt Mira Halpern. She looked at the bay mare. She paid $35. Not a penny more. She asked Aunt Mira if she knew a freighter who ran east to Juniper Wells. Aunt Mira said yes. A man named Jonas Kettle, half Shoshone on his mother's side, ran a light wagon twice a month, charged fare, slept in the yard for free at any stop that offered water and a bed of straw. Adaline hired Jonas Kettle for $2 silver and a hot supper at the shack. He came around at noon the next day with his wagon. He loaded her goods. He did not comment on the amount. He tied the bay mare to the tailgate. He handed Adaline up onto the seat. He clicked to his own team, and they rolled east out of Silver Fork at 1 in the afternoon under a sun so high it made no shadow. They reached Juniper Wells at dusk of the second day. Jonas carried the supplies through the door. He looked at the well. He drank from the bucket. He set the tin cup back on the stone rim. Ma'am. Yes. This water is among the 3 best in this country. Thank you. I will tell my people so. I will tell the drovers coming up the cattle road that the well at Juniper Wells is open again, and that there is a woman there who will draw water for a nickel a bucket if a man wants it drawn, or free if he is thirsty and has nothing. She thought about it. She thought about Ottilie in the letter. She thought about what a promise was. Free if he is thirsty and has nothing. Ma'am. And a nickel a bucket if he can pay. That is fair. That is fair. He touched his hat. He climbed back onto his wagon. He turned it. He rolled west into the failing light. He did not look back. She stood in the doorway of her shack, her deed folded in her apron pocket, the Springfield leaning against the jamb, the bay mare in a rope tether by the well, a keg of flour and a slab of bacon, and 6 panes of glass leaned in newspaper on her floor, and the light going blue over the flat. She said aloud to nobody, I am going to make this place hold, and she went in and closed the door. She worked on the shack through the whole rest of that summer. She replaced the window with 2 of the glass panes set in a frame she made from scraps of the pulled hinges and the old oilcloth. She used the remaining panes to build a small cold frame beside the south wall. She planted a row of turnip and a row of onion from seed Otis had thrown in on the second trip, because he had said, tapping his pencil twice, "You will thank me in November." She patched the roof with new tar paper on the third trip and tacked it down with roofing nails driven through squares of tin cut from a lard can. She reset the third hinge on the door with 2 of the 8-penny nails driven into fresh wood behind the split jamb. She repacked the joist under the sag in the roof with a pinion post cut from the low hills and shimmed with cedar wedges driven true. She built a corral of sorts, 40 feet by 40, from posts and rope. She named the bay mare Tilda, because it had felt right the first morning she saddled her. And she did not question a thing that felt right on the first morning. The drovers began to stop. In August, a man named Elias Doran drove 800 head north from the Texas country. He paid Adaline $2 silver for the use of the well for 1 day and 1 night. He left her a young red heifer he said had gone lame and would only slow him. Adaline rested the heifer 3 weeks and kept her. In September, a couple came through in a wagon bound for Oregon. They asked to sleep 1 night in the yard. Adaline gave them supper of bacon and turnip and thin coffee, and would not take the coin the woman offered. She thought of Ottilie's letter. She set the coin aside anyway, in a small clay jar under the bunk. And she said aloud to Ottilie, "That is 1, ma'am." She began, without deciding to begin, a habit of speaking aloud to Ottilie in the evenings. And to her grandfather, she would tell them what the day had held. She would tell them the turnip was up. The roof was tight. The well was drawing sweet. She hung the daguerreotype of Amos and Ottilie on the wall above the shelf. She did not feel alone, which was a strange and specific thing to notice, because she was alone in the ordinary sense. There was no other human being for 5 miles in any direction most days. But she was not lonely, which was, she began to understand, not the same thing at all. On a bright, cold afternoon in the last week of September, she heard a horse. She was in the cold frame pulling the first of the turnips. She stood up. She wiped her hands on her apron. She turned. A rider was coming in from the north. 1 horse, a dark bay, a man on it in a long canvas duster, and a hat pulled low. Behind him, strung on a long lead rope, 6 other horses, and behind the horses, a herd of maybe 200 head of mixed stock, cows and sheep, and a few goats moving through them, and 2 dogs working the edges. Adaline stood by her cold frame. She watched him come. He rode slow. He did not hurry. He did not raise a hand. He stopped his horse 40 feet from the well. He sat there for a full minute, looking at her, looking at the shack, looking at the well, looking at the corral with the bay mare in it. Then he said, in a voice that was low and did not carry more than it needed to, "Ma'am, may I water my stock at your well?" "You may." "How much?" "A nickel a bucket, or free if you have nothing." "I have a nickel." "Then a nickel." He touched his hat. He turned in the saddle. He whistled once low. The dogs began to bring the stock in. Adaline stepped aside and watched him work. He worked without waste. He watered the stock in shifts. He drew his own buckets. He did not ask her to draw them. When the stock was watered, he came to her at the cold frame. He was maybe 24, weather brown across the cheekbones, eyes gray, a 3-day beard, a mouth that did not smile easy, but did not look mean either. He held out 5 nickels in his palm. "Ma'am, 25 buckets, by my count." "That is honest counting. Most men round down." "I am not most men." She took the coins. He looked past her at the shelf inside the door. He saw the daguerreotype. His eyes stopped on it. He looked at it a long moment. Then he looked at Adaline, different, as if he had just seen something he had been looking for. "Ma'am." "Yes." "That woman on the shelf." "Yes." "Is her name Whitcomb?" Adaline felt the air change in her chest. How do you know that name? My mother told me. When I was a boy, every winter, she told me it the same way each time, because a story you tell right you tell the same way. Sir, ma'am, my name is Thaddeus Weatherly. Most call me Thad. My mother was named Cora Weatherly. In the summer of 1859 she came through this piece of country with her sister and a small child who was me. She was a widow. My father had died the winter before. She had no money. She had 4 days of walking and a canteen. She stopped at this shack because she saw the well. A woman came out. That woman. He nodded at the daguerreotype. That woman gave my mother a supper and a place to sleep one night in the yard. And in the morning she put into my mother's hand a $20 double eagle from a tin. And she said, when your boy grows, tell him a woman named Ottilie Whitcomb bought you a start. My mother told me that every winter of my life until she died. She told me it the same way each time, so I would remember it right. He looked at Adaline. Ma'am, I am asking, is that woman still on this place? She is not, sir. She has been gone 10 years. Then who? Who am I? Yes, ma'am. Adaline took a breath. She said, my name is Adaline Merriman. I came to this shack 4 months ago because my stepmother sent me here to die. I found the tin. I read Miss Ottilie's letter. I filed the deed in my own name in Silver Fork. I am the woman here now. Thad Weatherly looked at her a long moment. Then he took off his hat. He held it in both hands. Ma'am. Sir. I have been carrying that $20 debt for 24 years. My mother made me promise, when I was old enough, to find the woman at Juniper Wells and pay it back with what I could. I did not know if the well was still open. I did not know if there was still a woman here. I have come by this piece 3 times in the last 5 years hoping to see smoke from that chimney. This is the first time I have. He reached into the pocket of his duster. He took out a small leather purse. He set it on the stone rim of the well. That is a $20 double eagle in there. And it is not for you personally, ma'am. I want you to understand that. It is for whatever tin you keep. Because a debt from a stranger to a stranger belongs in the tin, where the stranger who paid it can find it if she comes. Adaline looked at the little purse on the stone. She did not touch it. She said, Sir, that is well spoken. Ma'am, you have a place to sleep tonight. I have my bedroll, and the yard is a yard. You have a supper? I have jerky and hardtack. You will eat with me, and you will sleep in the yard, because I do not know you well enough for anything else. And you will move your stock on in the morning. And you will come back, before winter, because a man who has kept a debt for 24 years is a man I would like to see the face of a second time, before the snow comes. He put his hat back on. He said, Ma'am, I will be back inside of 6 weeks. I promise you that. And the sun leaned to the west, and the light went long and gold across the flat, and Adaline Merriman stood in her own doorway, with a nickel worth of well-water money in one hand, and a stranger's $20 debt sitting quiet on the rim of her well. And she felt, for the first time, since her grandfather had died, that the country she stood in was hers. 2 nights later, in the last small hour before dawn, a horse came fast up the road, from the west. She sat up in the bunk. She reached for the Springfield. She lit the candle stub. She went to the door. She opened it a crack. The horse came in at a canter. It carried a small dark rider who slid off before the horse had stopped. Toby Rusk, 12 years old, from the livery at Silver Fork. His hair was wild from the ride. His shirt was wet through with sweat. He was breathing hard. Miss Adaline. Toby. What? Mr. Bland said to ride. He said tell you to ride to town or send word to him fast. He said don't send it by anybody except me. Toby. What? Ma'am. Your stepbrother. Silas. Colton. He was in the land office yesterday afternoon. He was asking about a piece of ground. He was asking about the east grazing near Juniper Wells. She stood in the doorway with the candle stub in her hand and the Springfield in the other. The cold air came in around her ankles. Above her the sky was the color of a bruise going yellow at the edges the way it had been the morning she had first stood in her own doorway. But it was a different morning. It was the morning the walking got harder. She brought Toby inside. She set the Springfield against the jamb. She put the candle on the shelf. She stirred the fire in the little stove until it caught fresh. She poured him a tin cup of coffee that had been cold on the back of the stove since midnight, and she set it in his hands anyway, because a boy who had ridden that hard needed something warm to hold. Even if it was not warm yet. Toby, sit. Yes, ma'am. Breathe. Yes, ma'am. He sat on the three-legged stool. His legs did not reach the floor by 3 inches. He was still breathing hard. He wrapped both hands around the tin cup. He did not drink yet. He looked up at her. Ma'am, Mr. Bland is real serious. I understand, he said. Silas Colton did not come in friendly. He came in with a man in a black coat from Denver. The man had papers. Papers. Papers, ma'am, Mr. Bland said. A lawyer's papers. She sat down on the edge of the bunk. Slow. Because a woman who sat down slow was a woman who could still stand back up. Toby, did Mr. Bland say what the papers claimed? He said the papers claimed the ground at Juniper Wells belonged to the Colton estate, under the terms of your father's second marriage. He said the man in the black coat had ridden 3 days from Denver. He said the papers had a seal on them from a court in Cheyenne. He said the man asked if any woman had come in to file on that ground in the last 4 months. And Mr. Bland lied to him, ma'am. He lied clean. He said no woman had come in, because he said he wanted to send me to you first. Adaline sat still. Ezra Bland had lied for her. A 68-year-old land clerk with a green eyeshade had looked a lawyer from Denver in the eye and had lied. Which meant he was afraid. Which meant he was afraid for her. She stood up. Toby, ma'am, drink the coffee. All of it, even if it is bad. Yes, ma'am. Then eat. There is bacon on the shelf and a piece of bread in the cloth. Eat what you can. Sleep 2 hours in my bunk. Not more. I will wake you. Yes, ma'am. Where are you going? I am not going anywhere. Not yet. I am going to sit at that stool and write letters. 12 of them. And you are going to carry them back with you when I wake you, because Silas will need 1 week to file, and I will need 3 days. And I am not going to spend those 3 days sitting in the shack waiting for him to arrive. Toby drank his coffee. He ate his bacon. He climbed into her bunk and was asleep in 90 seconds. Adaline sat on the stool. She took a piece of paper from the wrapper of Otis Renwick's window glass. She smoothed it on her knee. She sharpened a pencil with her paring knife. And she began to write. She wrote 12 letters. She wrote them fast. She wrote them plain. One went to Ezra Bland. Thanked him for the lie. It asked him to place a sealed copy of Ottilie's easement paper in the front drawer, where any lawyer who asked about the ground would be handed it before the deed. It asked him for 2 more certified copies of the easement. It enclosed a silver dollar for the fee. One went to Otis Renwick. It asked him to walk to 12 houses in Silver Fork. 12 drovers whose names she wrote out in a small clean column. Men who had watered at her well. Men who had eaten her bacon. Men who had paid her a fair nickel. It asked Otis to tell each man the shape of what was coming, and to ask each man to sign a paper Otis would draw up. A paper stating that the woman at Juniper Wells was known to him, that she had drawn water for his stock, that she had never cheated any man, that she had never turned any thirsty man away. She wrote a paragraph for Otis to copy at the top of the paper, in her own hand, because a woman who let a man phrase her defense in his own words was a woman who ended up defended in a shape she did not recognize. One went to Aunt Mira Halpern. Said, Ma'am, I am asking you a hard thing. I am asking you to close the boarding house for 1 week and to ride out to me, because I will need another woman standing beside me when they arrive. And I do not have another woman inside of 100 miles who knows me. Bring your rifle. Bring what tea you can spare. I will pay your board and your travel both. Come if you can. Do not come if you cannot. I will not hold it against you. One went to Jonas' kettle. It asked him to spread word along the cattle road, to every drover moving stock north or south, that the woman at Juniper Wells was to be visited before the 15th of October, not out of friendship, out of practicality, because a well that had watered their stock all summer was under a shadow, and a well under a shadow that stayed under a shadow was a well that closed. And a well that closed was a country that got smaller. She did not write the letter with any dramatics. She wrote it the way you write a bill of goods. She wrote 3 letters to drovers she had never met. Elias Doran's cousins up in Montana. Names Elias had given her in August. She had written them down because a lesson from long ago had settled in her the way certain lessons do. Write down every name a man gives you free. You will use half of them, and be sorry you did not write down the other half. She wrote 1 letter to a woman in Cheyenne named Prudence Ainsworth, who was a widow her mother had corresponded with when Adaline was a child, who had written back to her mother's estate condolence card 7 years ago in a hand Adaline still had the envelope of in her canvas bag. She wrote to Prudence Ainsworth and asked her if she knew any woman in the office of the territorial governor's clerk who could confirm, if asked, that the deed of Adaline Merriman of Juniper Wells was on file with the land office at Silver Fork, and that no application to override it had been recorded. She wrote 1 letter to her father. She wrote it and did not send it, and put it in the leather pouch beside Gideon's letter and Ottilie's letter, because a letter to a dead man was not a letter to a dead man. It was a letter to yourself with your father's name at the top, and you kept those. You did not send them. She wrote the last letter to Bram. She wrote it in 11 words. She wrote, "Brother, I have not forgotten the bundle in the grass. Adaline." She sealed it. She wrote his name on the front. She woke Toby at 7. She fed him a plate of turnips and bacon and a slab of hard bread with molasses. She rolled the 12 letters together with jute twine. She tucked them into an oilcloth wrap. She put the wrap in his saddlebag. "Toby." "Yes, ma'am." "You will not stop, except for water. You will ride straight to Silver Fork. You will take the letters to Mr. Bland first. You will hand him only his letter. You will let him look at the pile. He will help you decide who gets which second. He will help you write out the drover paper. You will sleep at the livery tonight. You will help Otis and Mr. Bland tomorrow. You will not tell any stranger my business. Do you understand?" "I understand, ma'am. There is a silver dollar for you in the envelope with Mr. Bland's letter. That is yours to keep. That is not for the horses." "Ma'am, I do not need money to do this. I would do it for nothing." "I know that, Toby. That is why I am giving you the dollar." He looked at her a long moment. He was 12. He had lost his father to a rockfall 2 years back. He worked for Aunt Mira for room and board and whatever came his way, and he had ridden 4 hours through the dark to tell her the shape of what was coming. He blinked hard once. "Yes, ma'am." He climbed onto his horse. He turned it. He went west out of her yard at a canter. The horse's breath made small clouds in the cold morning air, and then he was a small dark rider going smaller against the pale grass. And then not even that. She stood by the well. She looked west after him for a long time. Then she went and got the Springfield, and she began to work. She worked for 3 days. She cleaned the Springfield twice. She loaded and unloaded it. She practiced sighting on a stone she set 50 yards from the door. She did not fire it. She did not have cartridges to waste, but she practiced the motion. Lift. Cheek to stock. Breath. Squeeze. Lower. She practiced it 200 times over the 3 days, until the motion belonged to her arms the way a stitch belonged to her fingers. She gathered every piece of paper she owned. She spread them on the plank floor. The deed, the certified copy of the easement Ezra Bland had given her 4 months back. Ottilie's letter, Gideon's letter, the daguerreotype, her mother's silver thimble in its cotton wrap. She looked at all of them together. She could hold her whole life in 1 square yard of floor space. It should have made her feel small. It did not. It made her feel focused. Because a life you could hold in 1 square yard was a life you could carry into a dark room and set on a table and defend. She hid the tin. She lifted the plank. She took the tin out. She wrapped it in oilcloth. She wrapped it again in the folded gray blanket. She carried it out to the low broken hills 1/4 mile north. She dug a hole in the roots of a pinyon. She buried it. She marked the pinyon with a small pale stone at its base. She walked back to the shack the long way around so she would not wear a track. Because if a man came with papers and a Denver lawyer and could not prove a claim, he might still steal a tin. And she was not going to let Ottilie's 31 years be stolen. She reinforced the door. She took down the old plank shelf. She cut it in half. She fitted the 2 halves as a bar across the inside of the door with brackets she made from the coil of baling wire. She could drop the bar in 3 seconds. She could lift it in 5. She rehearsed dropping the bar 50 times. She rehearsed lifting it 50 times. She dug a second bucket well. Not a well, a cistern, a hole 6 feet deep and 3 feet across. She lined the walls with flat stones from the Pinyon Hills. She filled it with water carried from the main well in the tin bucket. 200 bucket trips over 2 days. Her back ached in a way she had not felt since her mother had died. She did not mind, because a woman with 2 water sources was a woman who could not be dried out. She covered the cistern with planks. She weighted the planks with river rock. She threw dirt over the whole thing and packed it down. She scattered the pale dirt with dust and grass so it did not look fresh. She hid the extra Springfield cartridges inside the stovepipe. In a small tin she cut and soldered from a lard can. She had learned to solder from her grandfather in the summer of her 14th year and had not needed to know how until this week. She thought about that as she was soldering. In the quiet, every skill Gideon had taught her had been a skill she had not needed for years and then had needed on a particular Wednesday and had been ready for, because he had taught her. She thought, if I live through this, if I live to be an old woman, I am going to teach every skill I know to any young woman who will sit still long enough to learn. She did not know yet how soon she would begin. On the morning of the 4th day, she heard a horse coming from the west, fast. She reached for the Springfield. She went to the window. She looked. It was not a rider she had feared. It was Thaddeus Weatherly. He came in at a canter, his duster flying open, his hat pulled low, 2 horses on a lead. His dogs were not with him. His stock was not with him. He had ridden alone and fast. He pulled up hard by the well. He swung down before the horse stopped. He looked at her in the doorway with the Springfield across her arm. He said, "Ma'am, I met a boy at Silver Fork yesterday, named Toby. He was carrying letters. He told me what was coming." She lowered the Springfield. "Sir, ma'am, I did not come to ask. I came because I would not sleep. I have set my stock at Elias Doran's place 3 days east. Elias will keep them a week, longer if needed. My dogs are with him. My horses are with you. I have my bedroll and my rifle, and I have 2 hands. I am asking, may I stay? Sir, I am not asking any man to stand between me and my stepbrother. Ma'am, I am not standing between you and your stepbrother. I am standing beside you. That is not the same thing. And I will not sleep in your shack. I will sleep in the yard, or in the Pinyon Hills if you prefer. And when this is done I will move on with my stock the way I would have moved on anyway. I owe a debt to a woman on a shelf. This is not payment. This is interest. Do you understand the difference?" She looked at him a long moment. He was 24. He had a 3-day beard. His eyes were gray. His mouth was set in a line that did not smile. She said, "You will sleep in the yard. You will build the second corral you offered to build in September. You will not stand between me and any Colton. You will stand 10 feet to my left, where I can see you and they can see you. You will not touch a gun. unless a gun has been drawn on me first. And you will call me Miss Merriman, until the day I ask you not to. Yes, ma'am. That day is not today. No, ma'am. Good. He set his bedroll in the yard 15 feet from the well. He began to dig post holes for the second corral before he had drunk his first cup of water. She watched him a moment, then she went back inside. Because a woman who watched a man dig post holes too long was a woman who forgot to reload her cartridges. They came on a Tuesday, 10 in the morning. The sky was a hard, clean October blue. The grass had gone gold. The wind was low. Adaline had been up since 3. She had drawn water. She had set the fire. She had dressed in her second dress, the one with the small mother-of-pearl buttons at the throat. She had put her hair up in the way her mother had shown her the winter before the fever. She had put the deed in her apron pocket, the certified copy of the easement in her other apron pocket. Ottilie's letter folded against her breastbone under her shirt beside Gideon's. The Springfield propped against the doorframe. Loaded. Thad was at the second corral, fitting a rail. He saw them first. He straightened up. He said low without looking at her, "Ma'am." 6 riders, coming up the road from the west. 1 wagon behind. She stepped out. She shaded her eyes. She counted. Silas out front on the big roan. She would have known the way he sat a horse, from a mile off. His shoulders too far forward. His weight too far to the outside. A man who rode a horse the way he moved through rooms, like he owned it. Bram beside him on the smaller bay, slouched, hat low. Behind them, 3 men she did not know, riding hard-mouthed horses, cowhands hired for wages. She could tell by the way they sat. The wagon behind carried 2 more. One held the reins. The other, in a black coat and a low bowler hat, sat straight-backed on the seat, with a leather case on his knee. The lawyer. Adaline felt her chest go small. She made it stop. She said aloud to herself, because Ottilie had said it in her letter, and she had memorized the sentence. "It is not their law. It is the law," she said back to Ottilie in the space inside her chest. "Not today, ma'am. Today it is my law." They came up. They stopped 50 yards short of the well. Silas rode forward alone. He rode up slow. He looked at the mended roof, the 2 corrals, the bay mare in the first, and Thad's 2 horses in the second. The cold frame with its last row of onion, the daguerreotype visible through the open door on the shelf. The Springfield leaning against the jamb. And his sister. He stopped his horse 6 feet from her. He did not dismount. "Adaline." "Silas. You look well." "I am well. Mother thought you would be dead." "Mother was wrong." He almost smiled. He did not. "I have brought a man from Denver. He is a lawyer. He is going to explain to you a piece of law you do not understand. And then you are going to sign a paper. And then you are going to come back to the ranch. And then we will not speak of any of this again, because it will be as if it did not happen." "It happened, Silas." He looked at her. Something moved in his face. It was there and it was gone. "Adaline, do not make me get down off this horse." "I am not making you do anything, Silas. You rode 50 miles. You made yourself do that." Behind him, in the wagon, the lawyer stood up. He was maybe 50, silver at the temples, a face like a good clock. He held the leather case in front of him. He stepped down. He walked forward. He came around the horse and stood beside Silas's stirrup. He looked up at Adaline. "Miss Merriman." "Sir, my name is Winfield Argyle. I represent the estate of Henry Merriman, deceased. I have come from Denver at the request of Mrs. Vera Colton to serve you with notice that the ground on which you are currently residing is the legal property of the estate. As a dependent of the estate, you may of course return to the family residence at any time and continue as a member of the household. However, you have no legal standing to occupy this particular piece of ground, which was conveyed by verbal understanding between your late father and his second wife in the year 1879. I have here." He opened the leather case. He took out a folded packet of paper. a notarized declaration to that effect, signed by Mrs. Colton, and by both of her sons as witnesses, signed also by 2 neighbors present at the time. I have, also, a brief filed with the district court at Cheyenne, which will formally establish the estate's claim within 30 days, unless a competing claim of greater standing is presented. He held out the packet. Adaline did not take it. She said, "Mr. Argyle." "Yes, miss. I would like to present a competing claim of greater standing." The lawyer's eyebrows moved, just a hair. "Mississippi, that is not a claim you can present here. That is a claim that must be filed." "It has been filed, sir, for months ago, at the land office at Silver Fork, in my name, for the fee of $12, under the standing of an unfiled homestead lapsed in 1849, which no member of my father's estate has ever occupied, or improved, or paid tax on, which was reopened for filing under the Homestead Act, and on which I have now been resident, and in improvement, continuous, for 4 months, which is a matter of public record, in the office of Mr. Ezra Bland." She took the deed out of her apron pocket. She held it up. She did not hand it to him. The lawyer looked at it a long moment. He said, "Mississippi, may I inspect that document?" "You may look at it, sir, from where you stand." He stepped closer. He looked. He read. He read the seal. He read the date. He looked at Silas. He said, "Mr. Colton, were you aware that this deed was on file?" Silas's face did not move. "I was not. Mr. Colton, this deed predates the notarized declaration in my case by 3 months. Then the declaration supersedes it." "That is not how a deed works, Mr. Colton. A deed filed with the Territorial Land Office is not superseded by a private notarized declaration among family members. That is not the law," Silas said, very quiet, so the men behind him could not hear, but Adaline could. "Then make it the law, Argyle. That is what I am paying you for." Winfield Argyle looked at Silas a long moment. Then he said, in a voice pitched for the whole yard, "Miss Merriman, I am willing to review the deed in Silver Fork this afternoon. If the deed is valid, as filed, I will inform my client accordingly. If it is not, I will proceed. I do not litigate under a false premise. That is not a service I offer." Silas turned his head sharp. "Argyle, Mr. Colton, I litigate for money, not for cousins." Adaline almost laughed. She did not, because there was one more paper. And it was the one that would end this. She said, "Mr. Argyle, one further matter." "Yes, miss. Before you ride back to Silver Fork, I would ask you to inspect a second document, which is filed in the same office, under the name Ottilie Whitcomb, in the summer of 1873, 10 years before my deed." She took the second paper out of her other apron pocket. She held it up. "This is a certified copy of an easement of water, filed by Ottilie Whitcomb on the well at Juniper Wells. It grants to all drovers passing on the cattle road, in perpetuity, as long as the courts of this territory shall stand, free access to draw water at this well, regardless of who holds the underlying deed. It is notarized. It is stamped. It is on file, under the doctrine of prior appropriation. It is older than the state that will follow this territory. And no court, sir, will overturn it. Because no court has ever overturned an easement of water in this country. Not once." She held it out. The lawyer took it. He read it. He read it twice. He looked at Adaline. He looked at Silas. He handed the paper back. He said, "Miss Merriman, I would like to compliment the clarity of your position." "Thank you, sir." He turned to Silas. "Mr. Colton, even if we were to overturn the deed, which we will not, because we cannot, under the easement your sister has just shown me, any drover in this territory retains a permanent right to water stock at this well, which means you will never fence it. You will never charge for it. You will never restrict access to it, which means the underlying ground is, for grazing purposes, not scarce. which means it has no market value beyond the cost of the water improvements themselves, which are, I note, considerable, and which your sister has made at her own expense, which we would be required to compensate her for, even in the event of a successful claim, which we will not have. Silas said, slow. You are telling me the ground is worth nothing to me. I am telling you, Mr. Colton, that the ground is worth to you exactly what it was worth to your late father, which is nothing, which is why he did not file on it, which is why it lapsed, which is why your sister was able to file on it, which is why she now owns it, which is why we will not be pursuing this claim, and which is why I will now be returning to Denver. He turned on his heel. He walked back to the wagon. He climbed onto the seat. He said, "Driver, silver fork." The wagon began to turn. Silas sat on the roan. He looked at Adaline for a long time. She looked at him back. She did not lower the deed. She did not lower the easement. She did not touch the Springfield. Behind her, 10 feet to her left, Thad Weatherly stood, with his hands loose at his sides. His rifle was not in his hands. It was leaning against a corral post, 6 feet from him. He had not moved toward it. He was not going to. He had understood at the moment the wagon turned, that this fight was over. And a man who did not understand when a fight was over was a man who ended fights he was not supposed to end. Silas looked at Thad. Thad looked back. Even. No smile. No challenge. Silas said, to Adaline, "Lo, who is that?" "That is Mr. Weatherly. He is a drover. He waters here in the fall." Adaline. Silas. Mother will not forgive this. Silas. Yes. I did not do this for Mother's forgiveness. I did this because a woman I never met left me a tin box under a floor, and a grandfather I loved left me a canteen, and you crossed my name out of a ledger in ink you had to sharpen. Mother's forgiveness is not on this table. It has not been on this table since the 14th of last April. Ride home, Silas. Tell Mother the paper held. He looked at her. Something moved in his face again. It was smaller this time, but it was there. Then he pulled his hat down. He turned the roan. He clicked to it. He rode back to the wagon and the 3 hired hands and his brother Bram. Bram was looking at Adaline, not at Silas. Bram looked at her a long moment. He did not lift his hand. He did not touch his hat. He only looked, and then he turned his horse and rode. Adaline watched him go. They rode west out of her yard in a slow line under a hard, clean October sky. And the wagon dust rose gold behind them. And they did not stop, and they did not turn, and they went smaller and smaller against the pale grass. And Adaline Merriman of Juniper Wells stood in her doorway, with a deed in one hand, and an easement in the other, and a Springfield leaned against the jam behind her. And Thaddeus Weatherly 10 feet to her left, with his hands loose. And she watched them go until they were not there, and she stood a long time after that, looking at the empty road. Then she said, aloud, quiet, to Ottilie in her chest, "Ma'am." It held. Thad did not speak. He turned. He picked up his rifle. He put it in the wagon. He went back to the corral. He fitted the rail he had been fitting when the riders came. And he did not look at her once. Because a man who looked at a woman at the wrong moment was a man who took a moment away from her that belonged to her alone. Adaline stood in her doorway, and she began, without meaning to cry. She did not cry the way she had held herself from crying in her father's front room. She did not cry the way she had held herself from crying under the floorboards. She cried the way a person cries when the thing they have been carrying for 4 months and 4 days is finally set down. Not because they cannot carry it, because they no longer have to. She cried standing up. Then she cried sitting on the stone rim of the well. Then she wiped her eyes with the hem of her apron. Then she went inside. She poured a cup of coffee. She drank it standing at the stove. Old habit. She caught herself. She sat down at the 3-legged stool. She drank the second cup sitting. She said, aloud, to the empty room, "That was one, Miss Ottilie. That was one. Winter came in the third week of November. Thad did not leave. He built the second corral. He built a hay shed. He built a small tack room off the shed. He rode to Elias Doran 3 times, and brought his stock in 100 head at a time, and settled them into the 2 corrals and the flat around them. He slept in the tack room after the first hard frost. Not in the shack. He did not ask to sleep in the shack. Adaline did not offer. It was not because she did not want him to. It was because she wanted him to, and she wanted the wanting to run a winter's length before she did anything about it. Because a woman, who had spent 7 years having her name crossed out of a ledger, was a woman who owed herself 1 winter alone in her own house before she let any man cross into it. Even a good one. She told him so, once, on a cold, clear morning in early December. As he was carrying in an armload of split pine, she said, "Mr. Weatherly, Miss Merriman, I want you to understand something." "Yes, ma'am. I am not indifferent to you." "No, ma'am. But I am going to be by myself in this house, from November to April." "That is not a rejection. That is a promise I am making to myself. Do you understand?" "I understand, ma'am. Come spring, you may ask me a question. I may say yes. I may say no. But I will not answer any question you ask me before then. And I do not want you to ask." "Yes, ma'am." "Good." He set the pine down beside the stove. He said, "Miss Merriman." "Yes." "That is the finest offer any woman has ever made me, and I am obliged to you." He went back out. She sat down on the 3-legged stool. She smiled. She was alone in her own house, and she smiled, and she thought, "That is a thing I have not done in 7 years." And she thought, "Miss Ottilie, that is too." She opened the school in January. She had not planned to open a school in January. She had planned to open one in the spring, when there was room to think, and when Toby Rusk could ride out easier. But in the first week of January, a young woman on a small dun horse came riding in from the north, alone, 17. Adaline could tell by the set of her shoulders. She rode the way a girl rides who has been on a horse for 6 days and has not slept in a bed for 4 of them. Adaline was drawing water at the well. She saw the dun coming across the flat from a long way off. She stood up. She set the bucket down. Thad was in the tack room. He saw her look. He came out. He stood at the corner of the shack. The girl rode in slow. She stopped 15 feet from the well. She sat on the dun. She did not dismount. She was very thin. She wore a coat too big for her. She had a bruise the color of old plum along her jaw. She said, "Ma'am, my name is Winifred Ashby. I am from a ranch in the Bitterroot country. I was married last April to a man named Rance Ashby. I left him 22 days ago. I have been told by a freighter named Jonas Kettle that there is a woman at Juniper Wells who might let me sleep one night in the yard." Adaline looked at Winifred Ashby. She looked at the bruise on her jaw. She looked at the dun. The dun had not been fed properly in a week. She looked at Thaddeus Weatherly. Thad met her eyes. He said, in a voice she could just hear, "I will feed the horse." He came forward. Slow. He held out a hand for the reins. Winifred flinched. Then she looked at him. Then she gave him the reins. He led the dun to the corral without another word. Adaline said, "Miss Ashby, you will not sleep in the yard." Winifred's mouth trembled. "Ma'am, I do not have money." "Miss Ashby, get down off that horse. Come inside. There is soup on the stove. There is a bed. There is a bar across the door that only I lift. And come the morning we will send for Mr. Ezra Bland in Silver Fork, who is a friend of mine, and who will know how to begin the papers you will need to be free of Rance Ashby forever. Do you understand?" Winifred Ashby began to cry. She cried the way a person cries who has been holding it for 22 days. She slid off the horse. She almost fell. Adaline caught her under the arms and held her up. She was lighter than she should have been. Adaline could feel the ribs through the coat. Adaline walked her inside. She sat her at the 3-legged stool. She put a bowl of soup in front of her. She said, "Eat." Winifred ate. Adaline sat on the edge of the bunk and watched her eat. And she thought, not now, but later, tonight, when Winifred was asleep in the bunk and Adaline was awake in the chair by the stove, with the Springfield across her knees. She would think, "Miss Ottilie, that is 3. She reached into the drawstring bag under the bunk. She took out a $20 double eagle from the tin she had dug up in November and reburied in the space under the floor, where she could reach it easy. She set it in a clean cloth. She folded the cloth. She put it in the pocket of Winifred Ashby's too big coat, where the coat hung on the nail by the door. She did not tell her, because Ottilie had not told Cora Weatherly either. You put the coin in the pocket, and you let the girl find it later. That was how it was done. That was how it had always been done. Spring came in the 3rd week of April. The turnips went in. The onion went in. 2 new rows this year, beets and carrots. Winifred Ashby went into Silver Fork in February with Toby Rusk and with a letter from Adaline to Ezra Bland. She stayed at Aunt Myra's boarding house for 6 weeks. She came back to Juniper Wells in the middle of March, with the beginning of her divorce papers and a job at Aunt Myra's for the summer. She rode out on Sundays. She helped Adaline with the school Adaline had begun on the 2nd Sunday in February. The school met in the shack. For children, Toby Rusk, and 2 boys and a girl from a homestead 6 miles south, whose parents had never learned to read, and who had asked Adaline to teach the children. Adaline used Ottilie's old McGuffey, the 1857th edition, its cover soft at the corners, from Ottilie's own girlhood reading. Adaline had found it wrapped in the oilcloth with the letter and the picture. Ottilie had put it there. Of course she had, because Ottilie had known. Ottilie had known that whoever came next was going to open a school someday, because Ottilie had once been a schoolteacher, and a schoolteacher never really stops. She only waits for the next room. Adaline taught the multiplication table on Sunday mornings, and the map of the states on Sunday afternoons, and the difference between a fact and a story someone had told the children in the last hour before supper. She taught with Ottilie's McGuffey open on her lap, and Gideon's canteen on the shelf, and Amos and Ottilie's daguerreotype on the wall above the shelf. And she taught with her mother's silver thimble in her apron pocket, because a woman who had had 4 teachers in her life ought to carry a token from each into every room where she was going to teach. On the last Saturday in April, Thaddeus Weatherly came to the door of the shack in his good shirt and his good boots. He had shaved. He had washed his hair. He was holding his hat in his hands the way he had held it the day he had come to the well in September and had recognized the daguerreotype. Adaline was at the door before he knocked. She had known, all morning, that he was going to come. He said, "Miss Merriman, Mr. Weatherly, may I ask you a question?" "You may." He asked it. She said yes. They were married in the yard beside the well on the 2nd Sunday in May. Ezra Bland rode out from Silver Fork on the church wagon. He wore his good black coat. He performed the ceremony because he was also a justice of the peace and had been for 19 years. Toby Rusk carried the ring. He was 13 now. He had grown 2 inches over the winter. Aunt Mira Halpern brought a cake. Winifred Ashby stood as Adaline's witness. She wore a dress Aunt Mira had helped her sew. The bruise on her jaw had been gone since February. Jonas Kettle brought a barrel of good drinking whiskey and a fiddler from the Shoshone camp 40 miles north, who played until sundown. Elias Doran drove 100 head of beef through the yard that afternoon on their way to the northern range. He paid 5 nickels at the well as he watered them. Adaline took the nickels. She put them in the clay jar under the bunk, which was full now, which she would have to empty into the tin come autumn. At sundown Adaline stood by the well with Thad beside her, the daguerreotype of Amos, and Ottilie sat on the stone rim of the well, where she had set it for the day, so they could watch, because Ottilie had spent 31 years watching this well, and she had earned the right to watch one more thing. Adaline picked up the daguerreotype. She looked at Ottilie's face. she said aloud so the whole yard could hear, but mostly so Ottilie could hear. Miss Ottilie, ma'am, I am obliged to you, for 31 years, and for the letter, and for the coin in the tin, and for the well that would not close. I will keep this place open, as long as I am living. I will teach the children who come. I will give a coin to the woman who comes next. I will pour the water for the man who has nothing. That is my promise to you, from the woman at Juniper Wells, who was left here to die, and who did not. She set the daguerreotype back on its stone. She turned to Thad. He took her hand. The sun set. The stars came up. The fiddler played one last slow tune. The children slept in the yard on Aunt Myra's blankets. Winifred Ashby sat on the rim of the well, with her feet in the grass, and her face tipped up to the sky. And Adaline Merriman, 19 years old, and left for dead in the summer of 1883, 20 years old, and married in the yard of her own homestead in the spring of 1884, stood by the well she had drawn her first bucket, from on the night she had walked in out of the grass, with a dented tin canteen and a folded letter from a grandfather 4 years buried. And she was not the same person. She was the woman at Juniper Wells. She was the woman they respected. She was the woman who kept the well open, and she would keep it open for another woman, and another, who would find under the floor of some other shack in some other summer of some other year a tin box painted with faded roses, and a letter in a plain schoolhouse hand, and 2 coins in a folded piece of blue calico, and a note in Adaline's own hand that would begin, "My name is Adaline Weatherly. Most called me Ada. I lived at Juniper Wells for 51 years. And the woman who read that note would sit back on her heels on the plank floor, and she would breathe, and she would understand that she had not been left to die, that she had been left to be found. If the story reached you tonight, leave a word below to say where you are listening from, and share it with a woman you love who has ever been counted at nothing. And then ask yourself before you sleep, what have you been given that looked like ruin, and what might be waiting for you under the floor of it? If only you thought to kneel